The screams came first, sharp, panicked, and too soft to belong to anyone who had the power to defend themselves. They sliced through the quiet morning air behind Crestwood Academy's parking lot, where the sun hung low and golden, casting gentle rays across the concrete. Then came the whimper of a dog, frightened and in pain. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze, birds paused mid-chirp, the breeze stalled, and even the distant hum of the highway faded. Because on that schoolyard asphalt, 3 rich boys surrounded a new girl in a wheelchair, her small service dog trembling beside her, as one of them lifted his foot and kicked the dog so hard it tumbled and squealed. None of them noticed the tall man in a faded navy blue t-shirt walking out of the school gym, carrying a duffel bag and wearing a look in his eyes that suggested he'd seen war zones, and that this cruelty cut deeper than any battlefield. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for those who can't defend themselves, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps spread these powerful stories. Her name was Cambria Hale, barely 15, new to the school since her mother had moved for work. Her wheelchair glinted in the sunlight, a custom-built chair with side guards and a sling bag attached to the back, decorated with small pins of planets and stars. Anyone looking at her would notice her quiet determination, the strength buried beneath her shy exterior, and the soft loyalty of her small golden therapy dog, Miso, who rarely left her side. Her legs, weakened from a spinal condition since birth, meant mobility looked different for her, but courage came naturally. She had lived with whispered stares, awkward questions, and pitiful smiles all her life, but nothing prepared her for Crestwood Academy, where money, status, and family names shaped the unspoken hierarchy. The boys who circled her that morning, Rylan Groves, Toby Kingswell, and Chase Dutton, were the type who carried their privilege like armor. Their families had buildings named after them. Their fathers attended charity galas with big checks. Their mothers ran committees that dictated rules for everyone else. They saw Cambria's wheelchair not as a battle she fought daily, but as a target. They didn't care that she hadn't said a word to them, that she didn't want trouble, or that her hands shook while trying to protect her dog. They enjoyed the power imbalance, and they flaunted it like a trophy. Cambria's heartbeat thudded like a drumline in her chest. She had only wanted to take Miso for a short walk behind the school before heading to class. Instead, she was now gripping the wheels of her chair, trying to turn away as Toby blocked her path. Miso barked at them, trembling but loyal, trying to protect his girl. That's when Rylan lifted his foot and kicked the little dog, sending him skidding along the pavement. Cambria's breath broke in her throat, not in a scream, because she didn't have the breath left for one, but in pure, helpless horror. The man who witnessed it all was Jackson Ridge, a retired Navy SEAL who had seen enough darkness overseas to recognize cruelty instantly. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, analyzing angles, distances, and escape routes out of habit. He had come to Crestwood Academy to substitute as a self-defense instructor for a month, hoping for a quiet transition into civilian life. But nothing about what he saw that morning felt quiet. It stirred something raw inside him, something protective and fierce. Because children shouldn't be harmed. Because the powerless shouldn't be targets. Because men like him didn't walk away from injustice, not after everything he'd survived. He dropped his duffel bag on the ground with a heavy thud. The boys jolted slightly but didn't turn. Jackson's boot struck the pavement with deliberate slowness as he approached, the kind of approach that soldiers used to announce a warning without words. Cambria heard him before she saw him, her eyes wide with fear as she clutched her lap. Jackson stepped forward, positioned himself between her and the boys, and for a moment, the sun cast him like a towering shield over her small, trembling form. That was the moment everything shifted. The boys froze. Even the one mid-sneer, Chase, seemed to deflate. Something about Jackson, maybe the calm, emotionless intensity in his expression, or the unmistakable authority in the way he stood, made them realize they had crossed a line they couldn't joke their way out of. But Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stared, the same steady, unbreaking gaze he had used to face down enemies in foreign deserts. And under that gaze, the boys' arrogance melted away like frost in sunlight. When they scattered, muttering excuses, tripping over their own feet, vanishing like cowards, Cambria finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands trembled as she pushed her chair forward, calling softly for Miso, who limped back to her with whines that broke Jackson's heart more than any battlefield injury ever had. He knelt, checking the dog gently, making sure nothing was broken. Then he looked up at Cambria, and she saw no pity there, only respect. The incident spread quickly across the school, whispered through hallways like wildfire. Not because the boys had bullied a disabled girl, that kind of cruelty, sadly, wasn't new. But because someone had finally stood up for her. Someone the students described as a giant, a soldier, a storm waiting to break. And because Cambria, despite everything, didn't cry or complain. She showed up to class that day, chin lifted, Miso resting faithfully beside her, and a quiet strength glowing through the fear in her eyes. Jackson reported the incident immediately, not caring whose sons the boys were. The principal panicked, administrators scrambled, and phone calls were made. Ryland, Toby, and Chase were suspended pending review. Their parents, enraged, stormed the office demanding explanations. But even they hesitated when Jackson calmly explained exactly what he saw. Something in his tone, polite but forged with steel, left them speechless. It was the calm of a man who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. Over the next days, Jackson checked in on Cambria during school lunches, ensuring she felt safe. He taught her small strength-building exercises for her arms, ways to maneuver her chair quickly, how to brace herself in tight spaces. Not because he wanted to turn her into a fighter, but because he wanted her to feel powerful in her own skin. He included Miso, too, teaching the little dog new ways to alert Cambria if danger approached. Cambria blossomed slowly, her fear giving way to confidence. The school counselor noticed it. Teachers whispered about it. Students felt it. And the bullies watched it happen, each day a reminder of the consequences of their cruelty. The sunlit days of training became a routine she cherished. She would wheel herself out into the courtyard at lunch, where the breeze fluttered through the trees and the warmth made her feel alive, and Jackson would sit beside her, sharing stories, not of war, but of perseverance, discipline, courage, and how people rebuild after life breaks them. Cambria listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word like a lifeline. Because she too felt broken sometimes. She too wondered if she could rebuild. One afternoon, as students poured out into the courtyard, something unexpected happened. Ryland Groves, once the ringleader of her torment, approached Cambria. Slowly. His father had forced him into volunteer therapy sessions after the suspension. His mother had cried when she learned what he'd done. And guilt had begun to gnaw at him in ways he couldn't ignore. His hands shook as he walked up to her. His voice stuttered as he tried to apologize. Cambria, shocked, stared at him with the quiet grace of someone who didn't expect apologies from the same world that hurt her. Jackson watched from a distance, arms crossed, unreadable but approving. Because growth mattered. Accountability mattered. And maybe, he thought, this moment would change Ryland more than punishment ever could. As days turned into weeks, Cambria's presence transformed the atmosphere of Crestwood Academy. Students who had once ignored her began sitting with her at lunch. Teachers praised her assignments more warmly. Administrators quietly installed ramps in areas previously ignored. Small changes, but meaningful ones. The girl in the wheelchair was no longer invisible, she was a symbol of resilience. Then came the day she stood up, not physically, but with her voice. During the school's weekly assembly, Cambria was invited to speak about kindness and inclusion. Her voice trembled at first, but as she described her journey, her fears, her strength, her hope, the auditorium fell silent. Even the students who usually whispered and joked sat still, hearing her truth in every word. And when she finished, Jackson watched the entire school rise to their feet in applause, their claps echoing through the hall like thunder. It was the sound of change. Months later, when Jackson's time at the school ended, he prepared to leave quietly. But Crestwood Academy had other plans. Students gathered at the entrance, holding signs of gratitude. Cambria wheeled up to him with Miso wagging enthusiastically, and she handed him a small bracelet she'd woven, navy blue and gold, the school colors, symbolizing strength and loyalty. Jackson felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the warmth of finding purpose outside the battlefield. Because sometimes, heroes didn't rescue nations. Sometimes, they rescued one girl in a wheelchair, and healed an entire school in the process. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner to help spread compassion and courage around the world. Special request. Comment, kindness wins, if you believe every small act of courage can change a life.